The champagne glasses were still clinking when my daughter-in-law leaned close and hissed, "Fat pig," her perfume hanging heavy between us. Still, I only smoothed my sleeve as the music played on, pretending not to notice the heat crawling up my neck. As the room laughed and danced, the sharp electronic chime from the bar suddenly cut through the air. While she swiped her card again and again, that same chime kept repeating, louder than her confidence. The same sound made it clear this wedding wasn't about love. It was about power I'd never questioned. That's when I realized I didn't need revenge. The man who bought her company had already frozen her world. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The Manhattan ballroom buzzed with energy, the air heavy with the scent of roses and expensive champagne. Every corner of the venue shimmered, gold leaf on the edges of the walls, the crystal chandelier refracting light like 1,000 stars. The guests, well-dressed in their finest evening wear, mingled with practiced smiles. The soft murmur of polite conversation blended with the jazz band's lilting notes. Emily was in her element, standing at the center of it all. The long white gown swirled around her like an immaculate cloud, and her smile sparkled like a well-polished diamond. Her eyes darted across the crowd, always searching for the next compliment, the next whisper of admiration. She moved with the grace of someone who knew every eye was on her and expected it. I watched from a distance, my hands loosely folded in front of me, feeling the years of quiet observation weigh heavily on my shoulders. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion, my son's wedding, but it felt like I was watching the celebration from behind a glass wall. Emily's laughter rang out, a little too loud, too sharp. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, who were hanging on her every word as usual. The applause was warm, but not for long. Then Emily caught sight of me across the room. Her eyes shifted, narrowing with a flash of something. I could hardly call it recognition. She wove her way through the crowd, the other guests parting like water in front of her. "Lily," she said, her voice sugary sweet, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so glad you could make it." I gave her a tight smile. "Wouldn't miss it." Her gaze swept over me, slow and assessing, like she was appraising a painting she didn't much care for. "You know, I was worried you might try to outshine me," she said, raising her voice just enough that the people near us could hear. I didn't flinch. "That seems unlikely." She smirked, but it wasn't playful. It was calculated. "Honestly, I'm just relieved you showed up dressed appropriately," Emily continued, as if the comment were harmless, as if we weren't standing in the middle of a room full of people. "Can you imagine if you'd worn something tighter, like a fat pig trying to squeeze into a sausage casing?" The room seemed to pause for a moment. A few awkward laughs punctuated the silence, nervous and unsure. But Emily's words hung in the air like a weight. I didn't blink, didn't react outwardly. I simply watched her, my hands tightening, my chest aching with a mix of disbelief and hurt. James was standing across the room, eyes wide, mouth slightly open in shock, but no words came. He couldn't speak. The space between him and me felt like an ocean. I didn't give Emily the satisfaction of an immediate response. Instead, I turned and walked away, the sting of her words not enough to make me lose my composure. The guests, too polite to look directly at me, shifted awkwardly as I made my way to a quieter corner. The sound of the band and the clinking of glasses faded as I pressed my back to the cool wall, my breath steady, but my heart racing. My phone buzzed in my bag. It was a message from Sophia. "Where are you?" I saw. "Don't stand there alone." I stared at the screen for a moment, the words ringing louder than Emily's insult. It wasn't just the wedding that had turned sour. It was everything, all at once. And as I stood there, trying to find my bearings, I felt the weight of something more dangerous than a simple insult. Something was about to shift. Something had already begun. I stood by the window, the cool glass pressed against my palm, the faint hum of conversation echoing from the ballroom behind me. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with Sophia's name. I picked it up with trembling hands. "Where are you?" I saw. "Don't stand there alone." The words were familiar, comforting. Sophia had always been there, a steady presence when everything else seemed to shift beneath my feet. I ran my thumb over the message, reading it again. She knew, she always knew when something was wrong. I looked up at the glittering skyline outside, the lights of New York casting shadows over the city that never slept. Was this it? Had I been right to let my son marry her? Another buzz broke through the silence. My son, James. I didn't even need to look at the name on the screen. I knew his voice would be filled with apology, regret, the kind of voice that asked for forgiveness but never knew how to earn it. I swiped the message open, but before I could reply, I heard the high-pitched clink of a champagne glass shattering from the other side of the room. Emily was standing near the bar, a look of confusion spreading across her face as she fumbled through her designer clutch. She pulled out a sleek black card, her fingers trembling as she swiped it across the terminal. There was a brief pause, and then the sound of the machine chimed in protest. Declined. Her eyes flickered with panic, and she turned to the waiter, offering him a tight smile. "Try it again," she said, too quickly, too loud. But when the waiter tried again, the screen flashed red. Declined. Emily's breath caught, her sharp features hardening. She dug her fingers into the clasp of her clutch, her eyes scanning the crowd for something or someone to blame. I watched her, the quiet sting of her earlier words still lingering in my chest, but now I couldn't help but feel a flicker of something else. Perhaps it was pity. Perhaps, just maybe, the tables had turned. She reached into her clutch again, this time pulling out a second card, a platinum card, as flawless and cold as the smile she'd worn just minutes ago. She swiped it once more, her lips curling into a tight line. Declined. Her hand froze, her gaze flickering toward the staff standing nearby, all eyes now trained on her. The whispers started, soft at first, then building into something louder, something sharper. Emily's pulse raced, and I could see the sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. She reached for a third card, this one red and embossed with gold lettering. Her fingers shook slightly as she inserted it into the reader. A moment of hope, perhaps, a desperate final attempt at grace. Declined. The room seemed to hold its breath as she looked up from the card reader, her face pale and flushed in equal measure. A nervous laugh escaped her, but it was hollow, empty. The silence that followed was thick with discomfort. The wedding guests, ever so polite, exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to step in or turn away. Victor Miller, standing near the far side of the ballroom, had been watching from a distance. He wasn't one for small talk, but he'd seen enough to recognize the unraveling of Emily's carefully constructed world. Victor had bought her company. He'd given her the wealth, the power, the opportunities that had made her believe she could look down on others without consequence. But now, as she struggled with the fallout of her own arrogance, he could see everything. The desperation in her eyes, the cracks in the facade. His gaze sharpened as the scene unfolded in front of him, and he made a decision in an instant. The kind of decision that men like him didn't hesitate to make. He didn't need to rush, didn't need to make a spectacle. He would handle this with the same precision he handled his empire. From across the room, his phone buzzed. He didn't check it immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, his eyes fixed on Emily. The game had already shifted, and now it was time to play. As the wedding guests continued to shift uneasily, murmuring to each other, Emily turned her back to the bar, pulling herself together as best as she could. But her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment, her posture stiff. She reached for her purse once more, but before she could make another attempt, she froze. The air seemed to still, a chill settling over her as she felt the unmistakable pressure of eyes on her. Something was happening, something she couldn't control, and just like that, the weight of the evening began to shift. The ballroom had slipped into an uneasy quiet. the music now a distant hum as Emily stood, rigid, near the bar. The guests had returned to their mingling, but the tension still hung thick in the air, like smoke after a fire. Emily's face had drained of all color, but her pride wasn't ready to give up. She fumbled through her purse again, pulling out her phone with trembling hands, dialing the number for her bank. The cold, automated voice on the other end greeted her, and her words came out fast, too fast, sharp with anger. "I need to speak with someone now. My accounts are frozen. I don't care what the reason is. Fix this." Her voice was a razor cutting through the polite hum of the evening, a stark contrast to the sophistication of the venue. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking a quick escape or an explanation. But there was nothing, just the dim lights reflecting off the crystal glasses, the sound of laughter ringing out from distant corners where others tried, unsuccessfully, to pretend nothing had gone wrong. The minutes stretched long as Emily waited, her patience thinning by the second. The assistant at the bank was unhelpful, the answers too slow, too vague. "I don't care about your business hours," she snapped, her breath quickening. "You don't understand what's at stake here. Fix it, now." But nothing came. No solution, only an inconvenient delay. And somewhere, across the room, Victor Miller stood silently, the unspoken weight of his presence all the explanation she needed. Just as Emily started to raise her voice again, her phone buzzed with another call, her assistant. The conversation was brief, but I could hear the panic in her words, the fury barely contained behind them. "Victor Miller did this," her assistant said, voice low, strained. "He's the one who froze the accounts. He made the call." Emily froze, the color draining from her face for the second time in less than an hour. Victor, the man who owned everything she'd worked so hard to build, the company, the empire, the illusion of control. Her knuckles whitened around the phone as the realization set in. From my corner, I heard the sharp crack of her scream, breaking through the muted chatter of the room. It was a sound of pure frustration, a sharp cry of someone who thought they had everything, only to have it yanked away in a moment of reckoning. I couldn't help it. A smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I stood there, unnoticed, watching her unravel. The sting of her words earlier, "fat pig," still burned, but now, watching her scramble for control, I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction. Her arrogance had finally caught up to her. It wasn't the same as taking back my own power, but it was close enough for now. My phone buzzed again. Sophia. "How are you doing?" she texted. "Do you need me to come over?" I couldn't help but smile at her concern, but I wasn't ready to talk about the mess that was my family just yet. I quickly typed back, "The lesson has begun." The phone call from James came moments later. His voice, always soft, always so careful, came through the line. "Mom, I'm so sorry about Emily. I don't know what she was thinking. Please don't let it ruin everything. I'll talk to her, make her apologize, fix this." His words were filled with a desperation I had come to expect, but they fell flat against the weight of the situation. "James," I said, the tone of my voice firm, my resolve hardening like stone. "It's too late for apologies. It's too late to fix anything." I could hear his breath catch on the other side of the line. "I love you," he murmured. "I just don't want to lose you over this." The words stung. But it wasn't the kind of pain that would sway me. This was bigger than him, bigger than Emily. This was about me, my life, my choices. "Maybe you should have thought of that before she humiliated me in front of everyone," I said, my voice steady. He didn't respond right away. He didn't have to. He couldn't fix this. I pressed the end button on my phone and stared into the crowd, my eyes sweeping over the stillness that now clung to Emily. Her attempts to salvage the situation were pathetic, at best. She was a queen without her throne, a ruler whose empire was crumbling faster than she could realize. But she wasn't the only one learning lessons tonight. I turned away, my mind already moving on to the next step of my plan. The game was just beginning, and Emily had no idea how far the consequences would reach. Emily's hands shook as she dialed Victor's number again, desperation clear in her every movement. The phone rang and rang, but it wasn't the sound of a connection, just the dead, empty tone of rejection. She hung up, rage and fear twisting in her gut, and dialed again. This time, the call was answered by his assistant, her voice smooth but distant. "Mr. Miller is unavailable," she said, the words falling like ice. "He's instructed me to inform you that your accounts have been frozen for business reasons." Frozen. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a temporary glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was Victor, the one man who controlled her destiny now, wielding his power without hesitation. Her mind scrambled for answers, her fingers shaking as she redialed her bank. The response came back just as cold. "We cannot release further information at this time. You'll need to contact your financial advisor." The words echoed in her ears, growing more suffocating with each passing second. There was no way around it. Her world was crumbling, and all she could do was watch. I sat in my apartment, an easy silence surrounding me. Sophia had gone home, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The city lights filtered through the window, but inside, everything felt still. I hadn't felt peace like this in years. As I poured myself another glass of wine, I thought about everything that had led up to this moment. Emily's public insult, the quiet years of being pushed aside, the humiliation. Now, she was paying for it. Her frantic calls to Victor, her attempts to salvage her finances, they were the final unraveling of a woman who thought she was untouchable. It wasn't the revenge I had once imagined, but in a way, it was better. The universe had conspired to deliver the lesson she needed, and I was here to witness it. I glanced down at my phone. Another message from James. "Mom, I'm so sorry about everything. I know Emily went too far. Please don't let this come between us." His words were laced with regret, but I didn't respond. He still didn't understand. He thought apologies could fix everything. As I sat back, my mind turned to my own journey, my own empire. I'd built it with grit, with perseverance, without anyone's help. I had made something from nothing, and yet I had allowed myself to be ignored, to be overlooked. The shift inside me had been quiet, but it was permanent now. Emily's downfall wasn't my doing, but it was a reminder of why I couldn't keep accepting the role of the silent observer. My phone buzzed again. James. But this time, I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could feel the tension in the air shift, and as I took a slow sip of my wine, I realized this was just the beginning. The lesson had begun, and Emily would soon learn just how much she had to lose. The first crack in Emily's perfect world appeared barely a day after Victor's decisive move. Her calls to her investors went unanswered or, worse, politely rejected. The numbers on the spreadsheets that had once climbed steadily upward now plummeted. Emily sat in her sleek office, the polished desk littered with documents, her fingers tracing the edges of the papers as if willing them to give up some secret solution. But no matter how many times she dialed the numbers, no one was interested in saving her company anymore. The call from the first major investor was polite but firm. "We've decided to pull out, Emily. We can't afford to be associated with your recent actions." Recent actions. Emily couldn't even process what that meant. All she knew was that her reputation was crumbling faster than the marble tiles under her feet. Victor had made it clear with a single statement, one that reverberated across the business world. "We have no interest in working with anyone who lacks professionalism." The press had wasted no time picking up the story, amplifying the cracks in her empire. The headline screamed, "Billionaire Victor Miller freezes assets of troubling CEO," and business mogul Victor Miller cuts ties with disgraced entrepreneur Emily Carter. The words lack of professionalism were everywhere, smeared across every inch of media, transforming her from a successful businesswoman into a pariah. Her brand, once synonymous with ambition and sophistication, was now a symbol of failure. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages and emails flooding in from colleagues, investors, even friends who had turned into silent bystanders. Everyone had an opinion, but none of them offered any real help. The weight of it crushed her. Emily didn't leave her office for hours, staring blankly at the piles of paperwork, hoping for some miracle that wasn't coming. Meanwhile, I watched it all unfold from a distance, each new article confirming what I had already known. Emily's pride had been her undoing, and now her downfall was public and irreversible. Sophia's words echoed in my mind as I poured myself another glass of wine, sitting back in the quiet of my apartment. "You've waited a long time for this, haven't you?" I hadn't answered her, but the truth was clear. I hadn't just waited. I had been patient. The universe was unfolding exactly as it was meant to, and I was finally free to watch the consequences unravel without any guilt. I glanced at my phone, seeing a text from James again. It was a familiar message. "Mom, I know this is hard, but please just talk to her. Emily's lost. I can't stand watching you both suffer." I didn't respond. The time for forgiveness had passed. What Emily had done was unforgivable, and no apology from James would change that. His naivety had kept him blind to the reality of his wife's actions, but he was starting to see now. As the days passed, I noticed subtle changes. James began to pull away from Emily, his calls to me more frequent, the tone of his voice softer, as if he were finally beginning to understand the depth of what had happened. He'd witnessed the destruction of his mother's peace for years, and now, watching Emily's public humiliation, he couldn't ignore it anymore. I could feel the shift, even from a distance. He was no longer defending her, and that, in itself, was a quiet form of victory, but I didn't revel in it. Not yet. Not when there was more to come. Emily's spiral continued, with each new setback fueling the fire of her self-doubt. The company's assets were frozen. Investors were pulling their money faster than she could find new sources of capital. It was the perfect storm, and it was only a matter of time before the fallout would claim her completely. And yet, in all of this, I remained calm, detached even. The game was playing out exactly as I had hoped, and the only thing left to do was watch it unfold to its inevitable conclusion. By now, Emily was no longer just a woman who had made a few bad choices. She was a cautionary tale, a symbol of hubris, a lesson to anyone who thought they could mistreat others and get away with it. And as I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle into me, I knew that Emily's fall from grace was far from over. It had only just begun. But the real twist, that was still to come. Emily's life had become a series of cold calls and unanswered emails. The days blurred together, each one a little more disorienting than the last. She had spent years building a persona, an empire, but now it was all unraveling in a way that felt impossible to stop. Her company, once a beacon of success, was now a sinking ship. The investors had all but abandoned her. The media had painted her as a cautionary tale. Even the most die-hard supporters had turned their backs. But Emily wasn't one to go down without a fight. She still had her charm, her sharp wit, her confidence, her beauty. She still had the resources, the connections, if she could just get someone to listen. She called a PR firm, hoping to salvage what was left of her reputation. The first step was a public apology. She wrote and rewrote the statement, each version more polished than the last, until it was perfect, a carefully crafted narrative of redemption. She posted it online, shared it on every platform, and waited. But the responses were lukewarm at best. Her words, once sharp and commanding, now seemed empty. The media didn't bite. The investors didn't return. The apology wasn't enough to undo the damage, to make her whole again. The world had moved on. Meanwhile, I was setting my own plans into motion. Sophia had been a quiet, unwavering support throughout all of this. Her advice had been invaluable, and now, as the dust settled around Emily, I felt ready to move forward in my own life. I hadn't expected to feel this calm. I'd spent so many years caught in the chaos of my family's drama that I had forgotten what it felt like to be me, without all the noise, without all the people pulling at me. The absence of their demands felt like freedom. Sitting across from Ruth at the small cafe, I felt a shift in myself. Ruth had always been the grounding force in my life, steady, sensible, and clear-eyed about what really mattered. "I think it's time," I told her, setting my cup of coffee down, the steam rising into the air. "It's time to invest in something for me. I'm ready to step back into the world." Ruth smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "You've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Lily. You've earned it." It felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders as I made the decision. I had been so focused on holding everything together for everyone else that I had lost sight of what I wanted, what I needed. It was time to start something new. I began reaching out to old business contacts, exploring new opportunities. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to tear me down. I was finally in control of my own narrative. As for Emily, her company continued to slip further into disarray. Victor had implemented a series of changes, restructuring her empire. A few of her former staff members had found new homes under his management, but most had left, disillusioned. The company's future remained uncertain. Victor's presence in her life was like an unspoken weight that crushed her every attempt at recovery. She was too far gone, and no amount of apologies, no carefully crafted PR statement could restore her former position. Victor had effectively taken the reins. Emily was no longer in charge. But there was a strange quiet in me now. Emily's failures were no longer my concern. I had spent so many years letting her behavior define my existence, letting her arrogance and cruelty shape how I saw myself. But I was done with that, done with playing the victim, done with accepting the role I'd been cast into. For the first time, I felt like I was living on my own terms. And just as I settled into my newfound peace, something unexpected happened. James reached out again. His voice, shaky but earnest, came through the phone. "Mom, I think it's time we talked." For a moment I hesitated, unsure of what to expect. But I was no longer afraid of whatever his words would be. I had rebuilt myself, step by step, from the wreckage of my past, and now I was ready to face whatever came next. But what was he about to say? What had he finally realized about his wife, about me, about everything that had happened? I took a breath and answered, "I'm listening." Emily's apology attempts only deepened the divide between her and the world she had built. The press had long since lost interest in her redemption story, and the investors who once believed in her vision were now pulling their money out with cold precision. Even her family had started distancing themselves, unsure of how to mend the gaping wound she'd created. Emily was no longer the center of attention. She was the cautionary tale, the example of a woman who had let arrogance consume her. Meanwhile, I was beginning to reclaim my own life. The months of emotional turmoil had finally subsided, leaving behind a quiet sense of peace. I had spent years bending to the will of my family, putting their needs before my own. But no more. It was time to focus on myself, to set boundaries, and to build the life I deserved. James reached out again. His voice, shaky with regret, came through the phone. "Mom, I think we need to talk. I'm starting to see things differently now, about everything." His words were heavy, filled with the weight of realizations he had clearly been avoiding. After all these years, it seemed James was finally coming to terms with the truth of his wife's actions and the toll they'd taken on everyone. I could feel the shift in him, a softening that hadn't been there before. "I'm listening," I said, my voice calm, unburdened by the anger that had once clouded our conversations. It was time for honesty, something that had been missing for too long. As we talked, the pieces started to fall into place. James spoke of his struggles, his guilt for not seeing the damage sooner, but also his understanding that he couldn't change what had happened. "I've been so blinded by everything. I didn't see how much this was hurting you," he admitted. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was a start. Slowly, painfully, we began to heal. I could feel the distance between us narrowing, but it wasn't a quick fix. There were years of hurt to untangle, and it would take time. But I was no longer the woman who had silently accepted her family's mistreatment. I had learned the hard way that my happiness wasn't dependent on their approval. I could take control of my own future, regardless of their choices. Sophia's advice echoed in my mind. "Lily, stop seeking validation from others. You've earned your place. Live for yourself." With renewed clarity, I began to take steps towards something new. I reached out to old business contacts, exploring opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. As for Emily, her financial struggles continued. Victor's restructuring had left her with little to cling to, and her attempts to salvage her company only exposed her vulnerabilities. Her reputation was permanently tainted, and no amount of public apologies could undo the damage she had done. She had reached the end of the road, and now it was time for me to move forward. But as I watched her flounder, I couldn't help but wonder, what would her next move be? The consequences of her actions were far from over, and I knew Emily wasn't finished yet. The game had changed, but the battle was far from won. The weeks that followed brought a calmness I hadn't expected. Emily's world continued to fall apart, but I was no longer watching from the sidelines. The anger that had fueled me for so long was fading, and with it, the bitterness that had poisoned my relationship with James. I had spent years carrying their burdens, but now I was finally putting myself first. I began to invest in my own future, focusing on charity work and mentoring young women in business. It felt like a return to myself, a part of me I had long neglected. Empowering others became my mission, and I found joy in helping those who reminded me of my younger self, ambitious, eager, and full of potential, but needing guidance. For the first time in ages, I wasn't looking for validation. I didn't need Emily's approval, or even James's. I could finally breathe freely. The weight of resentment I'd carried for years melted away, and in its place, there was only peace. Diana reached out soon after, of course. Her voice came through the phone, soft and pleading. "Lily, I know we've been through a lot, but can we find a way to reconcile?" I paused before responding. It wasn't that I didn't care for Diana. I did. But I had learned that some relationships require distance to heal, and others just aren't meant to be mended. "I've thought about it, Diana," I said, steady, "but I can't keep putting myself in the position to be hurt again. I need to protect my peace." The silence on the other end was heavy, but I didn't falter. I had spent too long letting family dynamics dictate my choices. I was done being the peacemaker. James called later that night, his voice shaky but genuine. "Mom, I realize now how much I've taken you for granted. I'm sorry for everything. I want to understand you better, to see the strength you've always had." His words hit me differently now. The son who had once been so blind to Emily's manipulation was finally seeing the truth of his own life. We talked for hours, not about Emily, not about the past, but about who we were becoming. The healing wasn't instant, but it had begun. I could feel the distance closing between us, not with apologies, but with understanding. James was learning to respect me as the woman I had always been, not just his mother. As I moved forward, the sense of liberation grew. The family drama that had dominated my existence was no longer my concern. I had rebuilt myself, focusing on what truly mattered, my own happiness and growth. But despite my peace, I knew that Emily's story wasn't finished. Her fall was still ongoing, and her desperation would eventually bring her back into my orbit. And I was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, no longer bound by the past, but stronger and more independent than ever before. The past had given me the strength to move forward, but Emily was still out there, and I knew that eventually she would come for me again. Emily's business was unraveling at a pace no one could have predicted. Once a symbol of ambition, her empire was now a cautionary tale. The lawsuits came in fast, investors accusing her of fraud, breach of contract, and mismanagement. The legal battles weighed on her, draining her energy, her resources, and her reputation. The press, hungry for a fresh scandal, gleefully reported her downfall. The headlines were everywhere. Emily Carter faces lawsuit after lawsuit, and former CEO sued for financial mismanagement. Emily had always prided herself on being the one who controlled the narrative, but now the narrative controlled her. Her name had gone from being synonymous with success to one linked with failure. I watched from the sidelines, unaffected. Emily had made her choices. Now the consequences were unfolding just as they should. I felt a quiet satisfaction but no triumph. She had carved her own path, and it had led her here. I was no longer tangled in her chaos, no longer consumed by her failures. I was finally free. James tried to intervene, of course. His voice came through the phone one evening, thick with concern. "Mom, I've been offering Emily help, financial support, resources, but it's not enough. The legal issues are spiraling out of control. She's losing everything, and I don't know how to stop it." His words, desperate as they were, didn't move me. I knew he was trying to hold on to the family he had always known, but this time I couldn't help. I wasn't going to pull Emily out of the wreckage she had created, not anymore. "I can't fix this, James," I told him, my voice calm but firm. "She made her choices. She has to face the consequences. You can't save her from this, and neither can I." The silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. He didn't respond immediately, but I knew he understood. He had been blind for so long, caught between his love for Emily and his loyalty to me. Now he was beginning to see the truth. For once, I wasn't part of the drama. I wasn't the one picking up the pieces. My focus was finally on me. And then, unexpectedly, an opportunity arose. A call from an old business associate, someone I had worked with years ago, came through. They were launching a new venture in my industry and wanted me to be part of it. They saw the potential in me, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a woman with a proven track record. The offer was a breath of fresh air. It was a chance to rebuild, to regain my place in the industry, but this time on my own terms. No more sacrifices, no more bending to others' expectations. It was time for me to reclaim my own identity. I accepted the offer. As I hung up the phone, I realized that while Emily's world crumbled, mine was just beginning to rise. I was no longer bound by the past. My future was mine to shape. And the best part? I was finally living for me. Emily's message had caught me off guard. "Can we talk? I want to make things right." I stared at the words, unsure of what to feel. After everything that had happened, was it even possible to find common ground with her? Her world had crumbled, and now she was asking for a second chance. It didn't sit well with me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I texted James. "I've heard from Emily." His reply was quick. "Mom, please, I know she's in a bad place. Can you at least listen to her?" I could feel his torn emotions through his words. He was stuck between his loyalty to Emily and his growing realization of what I had endured. I could understand his desperation, but I wasn't going to let his pain pull me back into the toxic cycle I'd been in for so long. I agreed to meet Emily, though only on my terms. The cafe we chose was quiet, far from prying eyes. When she walked in, she looked different, exhausted, her confident facade cracked. Her once perfect makeup was smudged, and her usual sharpness seemed dulled. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice cracking, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I've realized everything." I studied her face, searching for any sign that she was truly changed. But even as her words hung in the air, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing doubt. The woman sitting across from me was still the same person who had humiliated me at the wedding, the same one who had belittled me for years. Her apology, though heartfelt, was far too late. "I'm sorry, too," I said quietly, "but not for the reasons you think. I'm sorry for letting you walk all over me for so long. I'm sorry for not standing up for myself." She flinched at the honesty in my voice, but I wasn't done. "The truth is, Emily, it's too late. You've had your chance and you blew it. I've moved on. I'm not the person you used to know." Her face tightened as the reality of my words hit her. "You don't want to fix this?" she asked, almost pleading. "No," I replied, firm and clear. "I've learned that some things aren't worth fixing. Some relationships aren't meant to be mended." I stood to leave, the weight of years of hurt finally lifting off my shoulders. I had let her go, and in doing so, I felt lighter. I had learned that forgiveness didn't mean allowing someone to hurt you again. It meant setting boundaries, and Emily had crossed them one too many times. Later, James called, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Mom, I don't know. I want things to be okay again." I smiled softly. "It will be, James. Just not in the way you think." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The past was finally behind me, and as I moved forward, I knew I had made the right choice. Emily's story was hers to finish. My story, one of independence and growth, had only just begun. Emily's world had become a spectacle of failure. Her legal troubles deepened, with lawsuits piling up from investors, former partners, and disgruntled clients. The once admired CEO now found herself the subject of scorn in every corner of the media. Headlines screamed, "Emily Carter faces lawsuits for financial mismanagement, and disgraced businesswoman's downfall continues." She was losing everything. Her friends, colleagues, and family began to turn away. Emily had pushed them all too far, and now even the loyal ones couldn't ignore her unraveling. The more she struggled to hold on to the pieces of her crumbling empire, the more isolated she became. For me, though, the silence was sweet. I wasn't tangled in her drama anymore. I had moved on, focused on myself, my peace. I had spent too many years being consumed by Emily's chaos, but now I was finally free to build my own life. I was invited to speak at a conference, sharing my story of overcoming adversity. I had a message now, one of strength, resilience, and personal growth. Standing in front of an audience, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't known before. I spoke of taking control of my narrative, reclaiming my power, and finding my own happiness. The applause was overwhelming. The positive attention flowed in. I received interview requests, speaking invitations, and messages of gratitude from people who saw my story as an inspiration. I was becoming known for my journey of recovery and empowerment, and it felt incredible. My personal brand was growing, and for the first time, I wasn't just the mother of James or the wife of Emily. I was Lily, strong, independent, and unshakable. Meanwhile, Emily continued her downward spiral. Every attempt she made to restore her image only seemed to backfire. Desperate, she posted an apology online, thinking it might win back some sympathy. But instead of gaining forgiveness, she was met with ridicule. The public wasn't buying it. Her carefully constructed persona had crumbled, and now nothing she did could undo the damage. James reached out again, his voice filled with regret. "Mom, I'm trying to help her," he said, frustration seeping through his words. "I don't know how to fix this. Emily's falling apart." I could hear the pain in his voice. He was still torn between his wife and his mother. But this time, I wasn't going to be dragged back into the drama. "James," I said softly, "you can't fix her. She has to do that on her own. but you don't have to carry her burdens anymore. You've got to find your own way, too." His silence was heavy, but I knew he was beginning to understand. Slowly, he was realizing that some people, no matter how much you love them, just can't be saved. As for me, my future was beginning to unfold in ways I had never imagined. A tech company offered me an investment opportunity aligned with my philanthropic goals. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was no longer defined by my past, but by my own choices and actions. The road ahead was mine to take, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Lily Carter had become a name people respected, admired, and looked up to. Her rise from personal betrayal and heartbreak had transformed her into an icon of resilience. Each conference she spoke at, each article she wrote, her message of strength and independence resonated deeply. She wasn't just a survivor. She was thriving, building a legacy that would outlast even the darkest parts of her past. Her personal brand flourished. Invitations to speak at prestigious events and interviews about her journey came pouring in. Lily wasn't just talking business anymore. She was inspiring a generation of women to take control of their lives, to stop being defined by anyone but themselves. Her foundation, which she had started to mentor young women in business, gained traction, quickly becoming a beacon of hope and empowerment for those looking to make their own mark. Meanwhile, Emily's world continued to implode. The once admired CEO now found herself drowning in lawsuits from angry investors and creditors. With each passing day, her public image crumbled further. She was forced to sell the last pieces of her company, the empire she had carefully built over the years, now reduced to rubble. The press, once enamored with her ambition, now reveled in her fall. The contrast between the two women was stark. While Lily was receiving accolades for her strength, Emily was facing scorn. Lily's story was one of redemption, of rising from the ashes, while Emily's was a cautionary tale of hubris and self-destruction. James, meanwhile, had begun to realize the depth of the damage Emily had caused. As he watched his wife's public humiliation unfold, he pulled further away from her. He began to spend more time with Lily, slowly coming to terms with the truth. He finally saw the strength his mother had shown throughout the years, and his support for her grew more open. "Mom, I'm sorry for not being there for you," James said one evening, his voice raw. "You've been strong through all of this, and I've only started to see it." Lily smiled softly, her heart lightening as they took small but meaningful steps toward rebuilding their relationship. The distance between them, created by years of his blind loyalty to Emily, was finally closing. As Lily's own life and career blossomed, she was offered an investment opportunity in a new tech venture. The opportunity aligned perfectly with her philanthropic goals, combining her business expertise with her passion for helping others. It felt like the next step in her journey, one that would further cement her place in the world of business and charity. Emily, in desperation, posted an apology online, but instead of winning her back the public's favor, the apology backfired. It was met with ridicule and harsh criticism. No one was buying it anymore. The woman who had once been unstoppable was now just a shadow of her former self. But Lily wasn't looking back. She had finally taken control of her own future, and she wasn't about to let the remnants of Emily's downfall drag her back. The past was over. The future was hers to create. Emily's empire, once a beacon of innovation, was now under intense scrutiny. Investigations into her company had revealed a series of unethical practices that went far beyond financial mismanagement. Her treatment of employees, her disregard for transparency with investors, these were just the tip of the iceberg. As the press picked up on the news, her fall from grace turned into a full-scale public reckoning. Investors began pulling their support, and employees, once loyal to her, came forward with complaints of mistreatment and neglect. But where Emily's name was being dragged through the mud, Lily's story was being heralded as a triumph. The media, which had once been so enamored with Emily's rise, now turned their attention to Lily. She was celebrated not only for her business acumen, but for the grace with which she had endured the personal betrayals she had faced. There was a new narrative emerging, one where Lily was the hero, the woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing, who had persevered through adversity and never lost her dignity. Lily was becoming a household name. She was featured in interviews and magazine spreads, her story used as an example of how to rise above life's hardest challenges. She was the epitome of grace under pressure, a symbol of resilience for women everywhere. But she wasn't done yet. As her foundation flourished, Lily expanded her influence into the corporate world, speaking at major tech conferences and networking with industry leaders. Then, an unexpected call came. It was Victor Miller, the man who had once pulled the rug from under Emily's feet by freezing her accounts. The call, though anticipated, was still a surprise. Lily had long wondered if he would ever reach out. "Lily, I've been watching your progress," Victor said, his voice steady and confident as always. "You've turned your life around in ways most wouldn't have been able to. I want to offer you a collaboration, a partnership that could change the entire industry." Lily's heart raced. She had always known Victor as someone who made powerful moves, someone who could elevate a company with just a single decision. She had no doubt that this could be a game changer. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice steady but intrigued. "A venture that combines your expertise in business and philanthropy with my technology platform," Victor explained. "It's ambitious, but I think you're the perfect person to lead it. Together, we can disrupt the industry." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. For Lily, this was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, the chance to solidify her place as a true innovator in the business world. The fact that it was coming from Victor, the man who had made such a decisive move in her favor when he froze Emily's assets, made it even more fitting. Lily knew this was the next step in her journey, a step that would propel her even further into the spotlight. While Lily's future seemed brighter by the day, Emily's continued downfall was a stark contrast. She was losing everything, including her dignity. The investigations into her company kept gaining traction, and every attempt she made to salvage her reputation only seemed to make matters worse. Emily's personal and professional life were now in complete disarray. The public had turned on her in a way she hadn't anticipated, and every apology she issued was met with ridicule. She had become a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and ego. James, meanwhile, was evolving into a man Lily could finally be proud of. As the pressure mounted on Emily, he found himself more and more aligned with his mother. He began openly supporting Lily, offering her more than just apologies. He offered her his loyalty. No longer torn between his wife and his mother, James had come to understand where his true loyalty should lie. "Mom, I see you now," he said one evening, after one of Lily's public speeches. "What you've built, what you've overcome, it's incredible. I'm with you now, no matter what." It was a turning point for them. The emotional distance between them was narrowing, and Lily could finally feel the weight of years of silence lifting. It was a relief, a sign that her efforts to heal the relationship were paying off. As Lily's reputation soared, the media began featuring her not just as a businesswoman, but as a role model for overcoming betrayal, for reinventing herself after years of personal and professional turmoil. She had become the symbol of resilience, proving to the world that no matter how deep the scars, you could still rise. But as she stood at the apex of her success, with new ventures on the horizon, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's downfall was far from over. Emily had nothing left, except perhaps one last desperate play. Would she come back begging for another chance, or had she truly burned every bridge? The truth was, no matter how far Lily had come, Emily's legacy would never fully fade. The past had a way of circling back, and Lily was ready for whatever came next. Emily's last-ditch attempt to salvage her reputation was as futile as it was desperate. She had spent weeks drafting a new PR campaign, hoping that the carefully constructed narrative of redemption could pull her from the depths of disgrace. But as more legal issues piled up, fresh lawsuits, investigations into her treatment of investors and employees, the world was no longer willing to forgive her. Her public apologies were met with ridicule, each new statement only serving to remind the public of her arrogance and the broken promises she had left in her wake. Emily had played her cards, and now the game was over. For Lily, the contrast was striking. She had built something from the ground up, something real and lasting. The media continued to shower her with praise, recognizing her not just for her business acumen, but for the grace with which she had handled everything that life had thrown her way. She was no longer defined by the past, no longer a victim. She was a powerful woman in her own right, commanding respect and admiration wherever she went. As Emily's life disintegrated before her eyes, Lily's was flourishing. She had become the embodiment of success, an example of resilience, a woman who refused to be diminished by betrayal. New business opportunities poured in, each one more lucrative and promising than the last. Investors, drawn to her track record and her newfound influence, were eager to get on board with any venture she chose. It felt like the world was finally aligning in her favor. But there was more. James, who had once been so torn between his loyalty to his wife and his mother, was finally standing beside Lily without hesitation. His support wasn't just emotional anymore. He was stepping up, taking on a more significant role in her business ventures, helping to guide her through this new phase of her career. He wasn't just Lily's son. He was becoming her partner, both in business and in life. It was a healing moment for them, one that had been long overdue. The wounds from years of silence and misunderstanding were slowly closing, and Lily could feel their bond strengthening with every step they took forward together. Lily's public speaking career was also gaining momentum. She was invited to speak at even more prestigious events, where her message of personal empowerment and standing up against manipulation resonated deeply with audiences. She was now not only inspiring other women in business, but also teaching them to find their own voices, to stand firm against the kind of mistreatment she had suffered. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a role model, a mentor, a leader. Meanwhile, Emily's financial world continued to collapse. The last of her assets were frozen by authorities, a final nail in the coffin of her corporate empire. Any remaining hope she had of a recovery was swiftly extinguished as the legal system moved in. She had no one left to turn to, not even James, who had now firmly distanced himself from her. Her once proud empire was gone, replaced by bankruptcy, lawsuits, and public humiliation. The woman who had once ruled the business world now had nothing but empty promises and shattered dreams. And in the quiet of her success, Lily couldn't help but reflect on the journey. She had risen from the wreckage of her own broken past, and now she was stronger, more empowered, and more in control than she had ever been. Emily's failure didn't bring her satisfaction. It only served as a reminder of how far she had come. Lily had taken back her life, and with each new opportunity, she proved that no matter how many times you're knocked down, you can always stand taller. But as the media continued to focus on Emily's final public downfall, a part of Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this story was far from over. Emily might be down, but she wasn't out yet. Was there a final play she had yet to make? Lily wasn't looking back. She was focused on the future, ready for whatever came next, confident in the knowledge that no matter what, she had already won. But even as her success continued to grow, one question lingered in her mind. Would Emily ever fully accept the consequences of her actions? Or would there be one final desperate move to make? The past had shaped Lily, but it was the future that called her, and with every step forward she knew she was unstoppable. The journey Lily had traveled was nothing short of extraordinary. It had taken years to untangle herself from the wreckage of betrayal, to reclaim the life she had almost lost. The pain had been excruciating, but it had also forged something unbreakable within her. She had risen from the ashes of her past, stronger and more confident than she'd ever been, and now, standing on the cusp of the future, she reflected on all that she had achieved. She had always believed in the power of resilience, but until she had lived through it, she never understood the full depth of that belief. She had faced challenges that would have broken many, but she had found a way to rebuild herself, not just in business, but in life. The emotional scars were there, but they no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her power, and now she controlled the narrative. At a major event that honored women in business and philanthropy, Lily was finally given the recognition she deserved. The spotlight was on her, and for the first time in years, it felt like she wasn't sharing it with anyone. She wasn't hiding in the background, playing the role of the supportive mother or wife. This was her moment. As she stood on the stage, accepting the award for her contributions to business and charity, she realized just how far she had come. It wasn't just the accolades or the applause, it was the quiet confidence, the peace she had earned. The crowd's admiration was nothing compared to the peace within her. She was no longer fighting, no longer living under anyone's shadow. Emily's cruelty, her manipulation, her insults, none of it mattered anymore. Lily had stepped into her own light, and no one could take that away from her. As Lily walked off the stage, James was there, waiting. His smile was full of pride, something he hadn't shown in years. They had come a long way, and the emotional distance that had once existed between them was now gone. He was no longer the man caught between loyalty to his wife and the truth of his mother's strength. James had come into his own as well, stepping into a key role in Lily's thriving business. Together, they were building something new, not just a company, but a life they could both be proud of. Lily and James walked side by side, their bond now stronger than ever. Where once there had been silence, there was now open conversation, mutual respect and love. He was no longer the man who had been blind to his mother's pain. He was now a partner in her success, someone who understood the sacrifices she had made and the strength it had taken to rise above everything. It felt like freedom for both of them. And for Lily, freedom was something she had fought for, not just in business, but in her own life. She was finally free from the toxic family dynamics, no longer tethered to the past or to Emily's constant cruelty. She had learned to stand on her own, to trust herself, and to build a future that was entirely hers. Meanwhile, Emily's downfall continued, and it was no longer Lily's concern. Emily was sinking further into the mess she had created, and though a part of Lily might have once felt a pang of satisfaction, that was no longer the case. The past was the past, and Lily had no intention of looking back. She was living her life on her own terms, and nothing could shake the foundation she had built. Lily knew that Emily's story was far from over. There would likely be more attempts to claw her way back, more desperate bids for sympathy or attention. But none of it would reach Lily. She had built a life that was untouchable. When my daughter-in-law screamed at me in front of everyone, Lily thought to herself as she sat quietly in her office later that evening, I didn't just walk away. I built a life they could never touch. Her life, her future, was now entirely her own, and that was all she needed.